Present. Yeah.
Oh, I got it. So yeah, you did that here. Okay, I have the attachment now.
Okay,
Okay, so 15 megabytes. It's not that big.
it's not that big. I don't know why it was, unless I did, anyway. Good.
Connection doesn't like.
Yeah. Connected to your Wi-Fi.
It's very, you need to open the video. Okay, we'll continue what you yes. So you can start to you have to recap what you discussed with a short recap.
Yes. Sure.
Yeah. All night, you look like really fantastic. Thank you so much.
Sure.
It makes everything easier.
I'll highlight relevance and the proposed changes to material.
Okay.
Okay, so, hello, everyone. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. Thank you for joining again. I encourage you to ask questions like you did before.
Oh, your microphone.
Microphone.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you all for joining again, and I'm sorry, I apologize for the technical difficulties and being late. And I encourage you to ask questions, like you did yesterday, so, let's make it interactive. So thank you all for today. I want again, and I'm sorry, talk about the relevance principle difficulties and being late, proposed changes, and then we'll review or then we'll discuss like we did yesterday. So organizational boundaries, boundaries, make it interactive. So thank you all for today. I want to talk about how to talk about the relevance principle. And if we have time after that, we can start like proposed changes, and then we'll review or then we'll discuss just like we did yesterday. So organizational boundaries. Boundaries, make it interactive principle. So thank you all today. I want to talk about how to and if we have time after that, we can start proposed changes, and then we'll review and I'll jump around discuss like we did yesterday. So organizational boundaries and boundaries, make it interactive principle. So thank you all today. I want to talk about how to and if we have time after that, we can. So first one is the link to the standards and guides. So we'll review and I'll jump around. Second one is develop so we want to principles. So that you get more detailed information around. So and to the first one is the link to the standards and guides. So and I'll second one is like all the learning and that is and also second day is one and two holidays and it's so really the easiest tool is the calculation to get your visual accuracy and that is and also second day there is two holidays and it's so really the easiest tool is the calculation to get your visual accuracy and that is very there is holidays recently and whereas and it's really very like a year ago they changed this and that is very recently and whereas no longer and it's really like a year ago they changed but they do have a link to their class and you can responsibility and whereas in school no longer and it's but they do have a list down their class and you can recording and they are represented
ini sudah ada mengenai geser terkait dengan pelayanan dan di bawah sudah ada bagaimana itu akan pelayanan yang kami dapat kemudian pada saat ini ada kemudian ini sudah ada mengenai geser terkait dengan pelayanan dan di bawah sudah ada bagaimana Indonesia kami dapat yang sedia pada saat ini ada jadi kemudian tidak kemudian
and the reason why they say it's is because they want and the reason why they say it's water is because they LTV ya. Jadi kalau PCDP ini ada kuesioner yang mempertanyakan terkait dengan laporan jadinya usaha apakah laporan saya dijawabnya jadi kita menanyakan LTV ya. Jadi kalau PCDP ini ada kuesioner yang mempertanyakan terkait dengan laporan jadinya usaha
Jadi kalau tujuan dari investor atau ini ada kayak pertanyaan terkait jadi kalau mungkin untuk yang atau ini ada kayak pertanyaan jadi pertama
So CDP scores companies, and they can do exactly what's called so these are the companies that score the highest on the stars, and they show the A list for quantity forest and they either sort so CDP scores companies, and they can do exactly what's called So these are the companies that scored the highest on the certificated charts, and they show the A-list for and there's four regions. So CDP is alphabet, CDP scores so these are the companies that scored the highest on the certificated charts, and they show basically the A-list that they were I think that's correct. And there's four regions. So there are so CDP is alphabet, CDP scores CDP.net on the certificated charts, and they show basically the A-list that they were I think that's correct. And there's four regions. So there are so CDP is alphabet, CDP scores and finds there, or you can just search CDP.net on the certificated charts, and they show basically the A-list that they were I think that's correct. And there's four regions. So there are so CDP is alphabet, CDP scores and finds there, or you can just search CDP.net on the certificated charts, and they show basically the A-list that they were I think that's correct. And there's four regions. So there are so CDP scores and finds there, so this was for and the way that CDP.net on the certificated charts, and they show they score on a tier basically that's correct. And there's four questionnaire, and there are so this was for may not be and the way that things like that and that is a company that you don't have some basically that's correct. Questionnaire, and there are so this was for may not be and things like that and looking at that or is a company that you don't have they don't have that's correct. You don't understand in order to questionnaire, and there are so working on so this was present your request and they not things like that are looking at that or getting your data is but you don't have to respond to that because our scores and there's no reason so working together so this I present your request and they not things like that are looking at getting your data is respond to that because our scores and so working together
I feel relieved that the expert
I present your request
when I took in the
things like that
Yeah,
If you go to the data is interactive, but I think it's nice to because relevance, the main consideration is if you go to the data is interactive, but I think it's nice because relevant US has the main consideration I think it's nice government relevant I think it's
ini kan punya definisi apa namanya finansial materiality. Jadi kalau tentang laporan GRK itu biasa kita isi ada ketika ada laporan yang tidak apa ya itu secara umum operasional tidak
How do I contact customer support if I have a problem with my order?
Nanti ada sebenarnya kita yang terkait dulu kan punya definisi apa namanya finansial materiality. Jadi kalau kecenderungan laporan melihat oleh ada investor ketika memiliki tidak apa ya secara sebagai operasional
How do I contact customer support if I have a problem with my order?
Jadi istilahnya terkait bagaimana kan definisinya finansial materiality. Jadi kalau kecenderungan maka akan laporan melihat informasi atau istilah ada investor ketika memiliki yang apa ya secara sebagai operasional
How do I contact customer support if I have a problem with my order?
Jadi istilahnya terkait bagaimana kan definisinya finansial materiality. Jadi kalau kecenderungan maka akan laporan melihat informasi atau istilah ada investor ketika memiliki yang apa ya secara sebagai operasional
How do I contact customer support if I have a problem with my order?
Jadi istilahnya terkait bagaimana definisinya finansial materiality. Jadi kalau kecenderungan maka akan laporan melihat informasi atau istilah ada investor ketika memiliki yang apa ya secara sebagai operasional
How do I contact customer support if I have a problem with my order?
Jadi istilahnya terkait bagaimana
discussion on this. So, okay, let's talk about organizational boundaries. The GHG protocol has outlined two basic approaches to how a company can determine their organizational boundary. And this is important because it determines what is included in scopes 1, 2, and 3. And those two main methods or the two main approaches are the equity share approach and the control approach. And organizational boundary, whether or not, and this is a control approach or an operational determines approach what is included in scopes 1, 2, and 3. And those two main methods or the two main approaches are the equity share approach and the control approach. Organizational boundary, whether or not, and this is a control approach or an operational determines what is included in scopes 1, 2, and 3. And those two main methods are the two main approaches are the equity share approach and the control approach. Organizational boundary, whether or not, and this is a control approach or an operational determines and those two main methods are the two main approaches are the equity share approach.
Jadi bagaimana kita bisa melakukan itu ada dua sumber yang kedua jadi bisa dilihat bagaimana dari pelaporan nantinya kita tidak bagaimana finansial terkait dengan kami juga itu ada dua sumber terkait dengan kedua jadi bisa dilihat dari pelaporan nantinya kita tidak bagaimana finansial terkait kami juga bisa dilihat
You do not acknowledge you do not but they did
kemudian tidak akan organisasi yang they got to be hard to empty, but empty of resource. They got to be hard to empty, but empty of resource.
So, no, I have, you know, so, 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 I have, you know, so
Yeah, 5 more minutes. Do palms. Have a stadium, right? Or stadium. Yeah, but it's not public. Yeah, but more limits in the have a stadium, right? Or stadium. Yeah, but it's not public. Yeah, but more limits in the have a stadium, right? Or stadium. Yeah, but it's not public. Yeah, but more limits in yeah, and then you plan it whether they're going to use Christmas have a stadium, but mostly in stadium. Yeah, this uses opportunity. That's why like the small stuff yeah, yeah, and then you plan it whether they're going to use Christmas have a stadium, but mostly in stadium. Yeah, this uses
Kalau untuk yang
that's why like
Pak ya,
the small sampaikan seperti ada sedikit yeah, and then you plan it whether they're going to use yang saya share di yang manajemen itu ya di PGT ya kan, tapi nggak ada namanya Pertamina sih. Kalau untuk yang Pak ya, iya mereka ada sedikit yang anak turunan misalnya Pertamina, nah ini yang repot karena kalau Petronas dia memang mengadopsi yang IPK ini, tapi ada ASEAN IPK ini ada yang saya share di kalau untuk yang di itu ya di PGT ya kan, nanti nggak ada namanya Pertamina sih. Kalau untuk yang rata-rata memang pakai iya mereka jadi jelas dia yang anak turunan misalnya Pertamina, nah ini yang repot karena kalau Petronas dia memang iya ini yang IPK ini, tapi ada ASEAN IPK ini ada yang saya share di kalau untuk yang di itu ya di PGT ya kan, nanti nggak ada namanya Pertamina sih. Kalau untuk yang rata-rata yang di sini iya jadi jelas dia
itu ada ini sih dari Bu Yunis nanya, tapi nggak tahu Ibu Yunis mau nanya juga nggak sih? Saya contohnya kan tadi Mars itu kan perusahaan internasional kan. Nah kalau misalnya kita kontraknya itu dengan Mars di Indonesia, ya maksudnya
Spesifik malah di Makassar kan ya.
Mendefinisikan di si Marsnya ini bagaimana untuk mendefinisikan sebenarnya di laporan ini.
Okay.
Laporan
So we already get some assignment.
I have assignment.
Yeah, we will see the case of Mars. It's like there is Mars company operated here, operates here.
Okay.
And then if they become our client, what should we set the boundary, organization boundary? That's the example that we want to like exercise.
Should we plan on discussing that tomorrow? Or are you thinking second?
I think this afternoon is better. Like
Yeah.
but
I can do that during lunch, right?
yeah,
Yeah, but like research.
yeah, research on Mars.
Okay.
Sudah Bapak dan Ibu update-nya? Do you still need time to search for something?
No.
Okay, we can continue with the diagram. Oh, wait, we wait for her. She's not here yet. Oh, okay. Untuk yang Mars itu akan menjadi exercise kita siang ini, Pak.
Oh, iya.
Environment, the EPI of the and upwards. No, okay, I'll talk about this.
Betul kan itu sebelum. Coba cek nih ya, apakah dia di oh dimulai. Oke. Baik, Bapak dan Ibu, kita akan lanjutkan terkait dengan pertanyaan Pak Ismail mengenai bagaimana menentukan batasan organisasi untuk Mars itu akan dibahas nanti siang. Kalau untuk yang listrik itu ya sepertinya memang yang kita lakukan sudah benar sih gitu. Ya maksudnya memang operasional gitu. Karena kita kan nggak lihat bagaimana akuntansinya ini ya suka dengan itu ya. Kalau dari teks tadi itu harusnya kita ngecek duluan gitu, bagaimana kontrol finansialnya dia. Tapi itu berarti kita harus ke bagian finance-nya dia. melihat bagaimana hubungan FUPA dengan yang lain.
Okay. So when we're thinking about determining which approach we want to use, the corporate standard publishes a list of typical accounting categories with the financial accounting definition and what the reporting would look like under each approach. And this table, it's in the corporate standard. I don't remember what page.
We don't have it. It's in your old presentation or in the new one? We don't have it here.
Like, I just added it.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll send you the final deck.
Okay.
This is just a snapshot. If you reference the corporate standard, there's the full table. And this is based on IFRS accounting standards. So this is applicable to any company in the world. And it's a useful table to understand how to treat different entities using each approach. So for example, group companies, subsidiaries. So the parent company, so the term is group companies or subsidiaries. The parent company has the ability to direct the financial and the operating policies of the company with a view to gaining economic benefits from its activities, et cetera, et cetera. Using the equity share approach, if the subsidiary is fully consolidated, that implies that 100% of the subsidiary's income, expenses, assets, and liabilities are taken into the parent company's profit and loss account and balance sheet. Where it does not equal 100%, the consolidated profit and loss account and balance sheet. So it shows a deduction for the profits and net assets belonging to minority owners. If you're using the equity share approach and the parent company does not fully control the operations and finances of the subsidiary, but shares control with another entity, then you would report the equity share of greenhouse gas emissions. And so that is a simple calculation, sort of. Ideally, what you would do is roll all of your emissions up at the corporate level. And so if you have a subsidiary and you have 50% equity share of that subsidiary, and you're 50% equity, and you use the equity share approach, you would calculate the carbon emissions from that subsidiary and multiply it by 50% to get your share that you would then include in your parent company reporting.
Jadi pada dasarnya ini adalah tabel ya, nanti tabelnya akan di-share karena saya juga nggak bisa hafal ini tadi. So like that.
You can't see it.
No, I mean like di situ ada guidance ya bagaimana menentukan berapa emisi yang harus dilaporkan. Yang pertama itu group company atau subsidiary. Kalau misalnya perusahaan induknya itu memiliki kemampuan untuk menerapkan kebijakan finansial dan kebijakan operasional, di mana keuntungannya itu untuk menghasilkan keuntungan terhadap perusahaan induk. Nah, itu kalau berdasarkan equity shares itu yang dilaporkan oleh subsidiarinya itu berdasarkan pada shares-nya. Tapi kalau berdasarkan kontrol finansial itu 100% laporan emisinya, gitu.
If the parent company uses the financial control approach, then they would include 100% of the emissions from the subsidiary in their parent company reports.
Tapi kalau menggunakan pendekatan kepemilikan saham, tentu berdasarkan persentase kepemilikan saham tersebut. Gitu.
However, there is the thing to know, well, actually, we'll talk about that. I'll cover that. Yeah.
Ya, intinya nanti kalau bagaimana cara menentukan pendekatannya itu nanti kan kita juga di kuesioner ada pertanyaannya kan, mau pakai pendekatan apa, finansial, apa pakai equity. Nah, kalau misalnya perusahaannya itu bilang kontrol operasional, kan ada pilihannya juga kan, nggak hanya equity shares, tapi ada juga operational control. Nah, kalau misalnya dia bilang yang pakai operational control, nah kalau setahu saya yang seperti di SIPA itu kan dia yang melakukan semuanya sendiri, kontrol ke dia. Makanya dia pakai pendekatan itu, ya kita nggak usah lihat ke parent company-nya. Kalau misalnya nanti dia mau melaporkan itu ke parent company-nya, itu nanti dia yang menghitung berapa yang menjadi kontribusi dari parent company-nya. Atau malah nggak ada gitu yang ke parent company-nya.
Okay. So this is a useful chart in the standard that shows you how to apply the different control or the different approaches. So what is shown here is the solid line represents what you would include using the equity share approach. The long dashes show what you would include using the operational control approach. And the short dashes show what you would include using the financial control approach.
Jadi kalau di chart itu, ini salah satu contoh penerapan pada sebuah parent company yang memiliki beberapa anak usaha. Nah, itu dalam chart itu bisa dilihat kalau yang garisnya solid, yang tidak putus-putus, itu menandakan bagaimana kalau menggunakan pendekatan pemilikan saham. Kemudian kalau untuk yang garis putus-putus yang panjang, yang kedua itu adalah kalau menggunakan kontrol operasional. Kemudian yang dia garis putus-putus yang titik yang pendek itu bagaimana kalau menggunakan kontrol finansial. Jadi laporan itu bisa berbeda-beda bunyinya, besaran emisinya, tergantung pada bagaimana kontrol penerapan yang akan digunakan, pendekatan pelaporan yang mau digunakan. Apakah menggunakan pendekatan kepemilikan saham atau berdasarkan operational control atau financial control. Ya. Ini nanti kan pasti kalau kita memiliki klien, kalau dia memang ada cabang-cabangnya, dia pasti harus kita minta, dia harus tetapkan seperti apa dia terhadap ini. Karena ini juga nanti bisa jadi kayak dia itu punya 4 site, tapi semuanya itu dia kontrol secara operasional dan finansial gitu. Sehingga ya otomatis ketika kita berkontrak dengan induknya, ya anak-anaknya ikut ke kita, laporannya nanti semuanya jadi satu di parent company-nya. So I talked about a company which has like 4 site plans.
Yeah.
And then, but usually in Indonesia, the parent company control everything. So I think so that's why when we have a contract with one of the company, it's included to their subsidiaries. So we will have like 4 sites, like 4 sites, and then the other 3 are just like the subsidiaries, but because they control everything, it's just like different site plans, but the report goes to the parent, right?
Yeah. So in this example, Holland Industries has 6 different subsidiaries. Holland Switzerland's pretty straightforward. They have 100% equity share, and they control full control over everything, right? Finances, operations. Holland America, they have an 83% equity share. So Holland, if they use the equity share approach, Holland America would calculate their greenhouse gas emissions, and Holland Industries would take 83% of that number and to include it in their inventory. In this example, Holland Industries has 100% of financial and operational control over Holland America. So if they use either control approach, they would include 100% of the subsidiary's emissions.
I wonder if you were the person who has to do the inventory, which approach will you take for this situation? Because like I see the Nello and Sintal, they just even and the Sintal, the whole industry has no equity shares, no
Right.
operational control, no financial control.
I know. And so from a government perspective, this is challenging, right? Because today companies can choose, and most companies will only choose one. Most companies choose the financial control approach. That is the approach that most companies use in their reporting. However, some companies actually report using both approaches to show the difference between the equity and the financial control. But you can see that there is a great potential for double counting. So you may have a partner to Holland Industries that owns 17% of Holland America and decides, but may report nothing because they decide to use the control approach and they have zero financial or operational control. So there's a risk of double counting. And from a government perspective, that's important. You don't want double counting. From a, information perspective for companies, when they're doing this, their inventory and they're reporting it, they are really producing, well, it depends on where you are, but usually they're producing that material for, investors, customers, suppliers, other stakeholders, where understanding the double counting isn't as important because it's more informational. It's not used to meet like an ETS or, right, so an emission trading scheme or something. So this has to be scrutinized, I think.
So if you get a client like this, and then you should break down the report, like like between the Holland Industries.
That's right.
With the Holland Switzerland, definitely like you can have any type of approach, right?
That's
But
right.
for the Holland America, you should prefer to do the equity share report, or
No, there's no preference, I would say. But from the government perspective, probably equity share, but every company would need to, I would think that, so the typical companies will often disaggregate their data. And in other words, Holland Industries may use the share approach, but they may also publish 100% of the emissions for informational purposes from each of their subsidiaries. They may break it down. The problem with that is some companies view that as a competitive risk. So sometimes they don't. A lot of times companies will break down their emissions by region. That's another way that they would approach that. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Oh, okay. It's complicated though, but yeah. So the company can report any way they want, right? Like
Today they can, but there is a twist at the end of this. Yeah, let me continue, because this twist might influence how, yeah, so, like I said, I'm presenting this as it stands today. Let's talk about oil and gas in a minute, and then hold on a second, let me, um, here we go. Okay, so, like I said, all of these standards are undergoing a significant revision. The greenhouse gas protocol is looking at how, the guidance that they give companies related to these different approaches. And there is a recommendation that the equity share approach is removed as an option. So this is the twist. Now, this is from their draft on their progress to date. So it's not known if this is going to actually end up in a final draft and what kind of feedback will be received. I will say that not many companies use equity share today to report this equity share approach. They're going to recommend that companies consolidate greenhouse gas emissions based on financial control. And that if companies want to, they can separately report emissions under operational control. I think this probably applies. I think this is going to have the greatest impact on the oil and gas industry. And then there's also the option to maintain the operational control approach is a standalone option. Anyway, that is the twist, is that the equity share approach may be completely eliminated, and the recommendation will be financial control approach.
Jadi ini memang sulit ya kalau mau diputuskan mau menggunakan pendekatan apa. Tapi secara umum karena ini draftnya juga masih sedang dalam perbaikan, disarankan untuk menggunakan financial control. Gitu. Jadi kalau untuk yang seperti kasusnya Holland ini bisa saja dia menerbitkan secara terpisah ya, mana yang financial control dan yang operational control gitu. Tapi memang akan ada ini ya, kecenderungan nanti akan terjadi double counting gitu. Cuman ya karena ini susah untuk diputuskan gitu. Jadi rekomendasinya adalah untuk perusahaan adalah mengkonsolidasikan emisi gas rumah kaca itu berdasarkan financial control. Jadi kalau misalnya Bapak dan Ibu dapat klien, kemudian kelihatannya kok ruwet begitu ya, strukturnya antara yang parent dan apa itu, mungkin dan si perusahaannya sendiri mungkin ngotot bilang, saya menyerahkan kepada verifikator aja bagaimana nanti menyusun ininya ya. Maka kita akan memberikan saran untuk melakukan pendekatan financial control. Kontrak yang sudah pernah kita jalankan ya, seperti misalnya Mayora, itu kan ada parent company-nya ya. Mungkin kesalahan kita di masa lalu adalah kita tidak benar-benar mencari tahu kontrol finansial dan kontrol operasionalnya itu seperti apa gitu ya. Namanya juga kepepet buat akreditasi.
Yeah, and so I should also note that there has not been pushback on this proposal.
Oh.
So it may very well be adopted.
Kenapa Mbak itu kan rekomendasinya kan finansial. Kenapa bukan operasional?
Okay. So he asked, why is the recommendation? Why does the recommendation go to the financial control instead of equity shares?
I think because the financial control represents the financial risk and reward, and it aligns better with the corporate accounting standards. And I think it more accurately represents who bears the burden of the impact of those emissions. I think that's the justification.
Jadi kata kuncinya itu sebenarnya kembali ke pelaporan finansial, akuntansi finansial. Jadi mungkin sebenarnya ini berdasarkan pada IFRS reportnya mereka itu. Jadi kalau di sana itu siapa yang punya kontrol finansial, dia itu sebenarnya harus menanggung beban ya resiko dari aktivitas bisnis tersebut gitu. Dan itu mungkin sudah disebutkan ya di IFRS. Jadi kalau misalnya seperti kerugian, bangkrut atau apa itu ya dianunya bukan berdasarkan saham tapi berdasarkan yang atur finansial itu siapa gitu. Jadi lebih ke arah risk and reward. Risiko dan keuntungan. Ada lagi? LCV lain juga pasti nggak sampai ke situ lihatnya, karena apalagi waktu dikejar-kejar sama akreditasi itu udah nggak mungkin sempat ngecek sampai ke bagian finansialnya. Jadi mungkin kalau untuk sekarang mungkin ditanya dulu. Pertama-tama kalau mau berkontrak, kontrolnya bagaimana? Misal kayak kita kemarin kan kayak maksa Mayora untuk ini tanpa kita cek dulu. Nah, bagaimana hubungan dia dengan Mayora yang di pusat?
Walaupun dicek belum tentu dia mau terusnya.
Iya. Tapi setidaknya dia pasti mikir ini kontrolnya operasional atau finansial dengan Mayora yang di pusat. Setidaknya dia sebutkan itu. Kita nggak perlu tahu berapa besarnya, cuman hanya untuk tahu apakah mereka kontrolnya itu sahamnya bisa atau enggak. Kayaknya enggak sih. Semoga kan nggak sampai ke situ ngeceknya.
Saya mau tanya yang gambar itu.
Oh ya.
Yang ini kan yang di Holland Amerika itu kan dia sahamnya kan 83% ya. Kemudian di Kanada 33%. Kalau quick fix ya.
Quick fix.
Tapi kenapa di financial control itu di atas 100, di bawah 33, di bawah jadi 100 lagi gitu, enggak kayak berubah-berubah yang financial controlnya itu.
Okay. So he's asking in the diagram like this one, it has like 83. The whole of America has 83 shares, ownership, and then the Canada. But if based on the financial control, 100% belongs to the whole industry. And then while in the quick fix, the ownership of the share equity is just like 43, and then the 100% financial control is by the whole industry. But for Nello, like the whole industry has no financial control. So how could this happen if this number is just imaginary or this is the real case?
Like this is not a real case. This is an example that they're using, but I think it's a realistic example.
Yeah, I mean, can a company which has like
56 majority
or even like 43% majority equity, but can have like 100% financial control. Is it possible?
Yes, it is. Yes. They have a minor share, but they have it. I think it's rare, but this was put together with a team of, people from companies also, so, in theory, it could exist. Yes. And I can't think of an example, but.
Yeah, but it's possible. Like, jadi memungkinkan ya Pak, walaupun suatu perusahaan dia punya sahamnya itu kecil, tapi dia mengontrol secara finansial.
Kalau ini Kahuna Sentence itu kan dia 33, kenapa finansialnya itu sama dengan equity-nya?
Itu kan tergantung dari ininya Pak, kayak istilahnya anggaran dasar, anggaran tahunannya kan. So I think the financial control and then the equity shares is decided by the board of direction.
That is correct. Very good point.
Yeah.
Yes. The board of directors. And so who's making the decisions in the company? And for instance, in the quick fix example, it could be, it would be the case that Holland Industries, even though they have a minor equity share, that they have board control over quick fix.
Hindi kahon itu berarti financial kalau ini bisa sama dengan equity dia cuma bukan cuma 100 sama 0 aja.
Bisa. Itu kayak tergantung di ART-nya. Saya punya sebenarnya contoh nyata Pak. Jadi kasus klien TKDN saya yang kemarin yang di Surabaya. Tapi jadi iya karena saya baca ininya apa istilahnya kan baca itunya kan atau notarisnya tentang kepemilikan gitu. Jadi sebenarnya pendirinya itu sekarang istilahnya kayak dia itu sudah nggak punya saham yang besar lagi di situ karena sudah melantai di lantai bursa gitu. Cuman tetap dia punya operasional itu kontrolnya 100% finansial dan ini gitu dan apa istilahnya operasional dan finansial gitu. Tapi ini off the record ya maksudnya.
For Kahuna Chemicals, why the financial control is same with the equity share?
So he's still asking why the equity shares in Kahuna Chemicals can be the same as the financial control.
So that would be a case where Holland Industries shares it would be a case where 33% of Kahuna Chemicals assets and liabilities are on Holland Industries balance sheet.
Ya, jadi itu tergantung dengan kepemilikan ininya Pak, aset yang entah itu mesin, entah itu bangunan gitu. Jadi, nah itu sudah awal. Jadi bisa saja dia itu punya memang punya saldo 33% dan memang kepemilikan asetnya memang cuma segitu gitu. Beda dengan kalau misalnya kayak yang tadi saya bilang ya, ada perusahaan nih. Dia itu yang dulu dia pendirinya. Otomatis kan semua aset itu punyanya, tanahnya semua pasti atas nama dia kan gitu. Kemudian setelah dia melantai di lantai bursa dan si bapak ini karena udah tua dia nggak mau pegang saham banyak-banyak gitu, jadi dijual ke umum. Tapi tetap karena bangunan semua asetnya dia bisa punya kontrol finansial lebih besar, kontrol operasional juga lebih besar. Tapi ya kasusnya seperti yang di Quick Fix kalau yang di klien saya itu.
Persentase juga berarti kalau financing.
Bisa juga.
Cuma 100
Enggak. Ya.
Kalau yang riset kan memang begitu persentase.
Ya. Tapi equity dengan finansial itu memang nggak ini kan karena kan namanya equity shares itu cuma bapak nih beli sahamnya PT Telkom karena bapak belinya dari sekarang sampai nanti umur 75 tahun bapak beli terus bapak jadi punya banyak share saham di PT Telkom tapi kan bapak nggak punya power juga mau pecat siapa juga nggak bisa.
Iya. Hanya punya suara ketika ini.
Iya.
Tapi
kayak sehari-hari bapak mau mecat satpam saya nggak suka nih suka molor gitu nggak bisa.
Diserahkan ke dia.
Itu bukan saham bapak baca.
Iya.
So we're talking about the real example, even if like you own the equity, big equity, but you may not involved in the financial thing. So because you just buy the brand equity at the stock markets, and then you are not in the board of the directors or
Right.
so you have no power to control the company, like to fire someone you don't like.
Yeah. That's right. And the other thing that this diagram shows is that if there's a subsidiary of a subsidiary, you would just multiply and multiply. So if you are considering Holland America and you're using the equity share approach, and you would then and you're looking at how much of BGB's carbon emissions should I account for in my inventory using the equity share approach, you would multiply 41.5 times 83 to get that number. Yeah, so I think that,
Oh, we have another example. The next slide. You do. Of the organization and operating environment.
Oh, yeah, well, let's, oh, yeah, okay, well, we'll. Yeah, delete that.
Kita lanjut ya.
Huh?
You don't need to delete it. Like this is just example. We can just like if we have time we can discuss. But if you think that that's but we always have a long discussion with this Holland.
Yeah, it was all on industries. Okay, so this is redundant. Okay, so the question was asked about oil and gas industry. And I pulled this from the corporate standard just a minute ago. This is directly quoted from the corporate standard. So they're talking about the oil and gas industry and the complexity of the ownership and operatorship structures. And kind of emphasizing that how an oil and gas company chooses whether or not they choose to use financial control or operational control can have substantial consequences for their inventory. They have guidance, there's no rule around this, but they basically say that the companies should take into account how their emissions accounting and reporting can best meet the requirements of emission trading schemes and how it aligns with financial reporting and other environmental reporting. And how does it represent the company's actual power of control? So it's guidance around oil and gas, but there is a separate standard for the oil and gas industry. Did you pull that?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's IPIECA 2003, and it has additional guidance for how to apply the control approach and what's included in your inventory as an oil and gas company.
Yeah. The IPIC has the Asian Council on Petroleum as hobby. So yeah,
Okay.
so with Asia we have like
You
the
have your own, there's one for Asian.
yeah, but it's still like under the IPIEC.
Okay. Oh, yeah, okay. So we'll the link.
Yes.
So these are two examples that they give of the corporate standard to help you understand. So if we look on the right-hand side, Royal Dutch Shell, they report using operational control. Because of the complex ownership and control structures, Royal Dutch Shell has chosen to report its greenhouse gas emissions on the basis of operational control. So it reports 100% of greenhouse gas emissions from all ventures under its operational control, irrespective or regardless of its share in the venture's equity. And they do this because they want to ensure that their emissions reporting lines up with their operational policy for their environment, health, and safety performance monitoring guidelines.
So that's just hanya contoh bagaimana pelaporan emisi di sektor oil and gas. Ya, itu kalau yang BP, British Petroleum, dia menggunakan equity shares. Tapi kalau yang Shell, yang Royal Dutch itu, ya ini yang pembensin yang
Yeah, so it's two different examples in the oil
ya,
gas.
gunakan pendekatan operasional. Kayaknya mungkin kalau di Indonesia mungkin lebih banyak yang menggunakan pendekatan operasional juga sih daripada kayak equity shares. I think it's also because of the consistency, like equity, stock market is something that is very it has turbulence.
Yes, yes, that's right.
If you have to report something based on it quickly, like every year, you
That's a really good
may
point.
have.
Yeah, there's not consistency. Yes. Yeah. And they do note that independent auditors have expressed the opinion that the reported total has been found free of material misstatement. So, but your point is a good one, is that if you're thinking about equity, it's difficult because of the changes over time. Okay.
Ya, jadi mungkin kalau untuk seperti pembangkit listrik, kemudian juga pengguran minyak, di mana kayak saham itu kan sangat fluktuatif ya. Jadi mungkin untuk pelaporan mungkin ya lebih baik dipilih yang operational control, karena biasanya walaupun berganti kepemilikan, tapi yang operasionalnya tuh biasanya kan nggak ganti gitu.
So, we're going to move on to operational boundary.
Yeah, sure.
And the slide doesn't know this.
Oh, okay.
So this is where you determine, so you've defined your organizational boundary. The operational boundary is how you determine within that organizational boundary, what do you include, what is included in scope 1, what's included in scope 2, and what's included in scope 3. We will talk specifically about leased assets. When setting the operational boundary for leased assets, ensure your control approach is aligned with the company's accounting. Look at how leases are recorded on the books. We'll talk about that more in a second. This is a nice diagram that shows kind of this, the application of both the organizational boundary and the operational boundary. So you see that we have a parent company that has determined that it has, let's say, full control, say full financial control over company A, company B, company C, and company D. Within that corporate structure, they have several sources of emissions. They have a shipping, company A owns a shipping fleet. Company B has power generation and has buildings that it owns and controls. Company C owns a car fleet. Company D leases a factory and has buildings that they own. And the parent company also leases buildings. So, assets. Okay, so they're reporting using, let's say they're reporting using financial control approach. The shipping fleet owned by company A would be included in their direct emissions, their direct and indirect emissions. So in scope 1 and 2. Company B, the power generation unit, again, that would be included in scope 1 and 2. Their owned buildings, again, included in scope 1 and 2. So all of this that they own is included in scope 1 and 2. Now, when we're thinking about leased buildings, it's important to understand how the leases are consolidated in their financial statements. If a car fleet is leased and it is recorded in their books as either a financial lease or an operational lease, then the consolidation criteria, meaning you would include it in your operational boundary for scope 1 and 2, would apply. So likely that's scope 1, but if they have an EV fleet, it would also be scope 2. Company B has leased buildings and a leased car fleet. Their leased buildings are in their financial accounting, recorded as either a financial lease or an operational lease. Again, that would fall under their direct controls, the consolidation criteria applies, and they would report the emissions from that leased building under scope 1 and 2. But they also lease a car fleet where that does not show up on their books, company B. Therefore, the consolidation criteria does not apply, and that would be reported under scope 3.
Jadi ini ada contoh ya bagaimana penetapan batasan operasional dari sebuah perusahaan induk yang memiliki 4 anak perusahaan gitu. Nah, ini bagaimana menetapkan batasan operasional, batasan organisasi, kemudian dengan batasan operasional. Nah, kalau dari chart yang oranye yang sebelumnya itu bisa dilihat kalau untuk yang batasan organisasinya itu adalah di perusahaan-perusahaannya. Kemudian kalau batasan operasionalnya itu akan dipecah lagi. Nah, ini seperti di tabel di gambar yang hijau, gambar 5. Nah, itu dilihat kayak perusahaan A. Jadi kalau misalnya dia itu mempunyai kendaraan yang disewakan itu karena dia ini langsung istilahnya itu memang asetnya itu punyanya perusahaan A, itu masuk kategorinya di skop 1. Kemudian untuk yang B itu dia memiliki bangunan yang disewakan. Nah, kalau itu harus dilihat-lihat dulu, ada yang masuk di skop 1 dan ada yang masuk di skop 2. Tetapi kalau untuk yang company B itu ketika dia memiliki kendaraan yang disewakan, nah ini konsolidasi yang dipilih yang operasional itu tidak masuk sehingga masuk di skop 3. Nah, ini ada studi kasusnya sih ya, ini jadi harus dibaca di studi kasusnya gitu. Tapi secara chart kayaknya ini digambarkan di gambar 2 dan gambar 5. Untuk yang gambar 5 ini kayaknya yang ada di ini contoh organisasi dan batasan organisasi dan batasan operasional. Nah, ini kan kalau soalnya kan disampaikan kalau untuk perusahaan A dia memiliki financial control terhadap A dan B, tetapi hanya 30% non-operated interest dan no financial control pada perusahaan C gitu. Jadi ini sudah ada contoh soal dan diagramnya dan penggambarannya bagaimana menetapkan yang mana yang batasan organisasi, mana yang batasan operasional. I think I have question. This like the list part split. Why it's included the scope 3 while this the list part split scope 1. It's in this. Did they mention something? Because it mentioned that the parent company has full ownership of A and B.
Of Donaldson,
Yeah, this one, like this one.
they have full ownership of company A and B. But however, company B is leasing a car fleet,
Mhm.
and it's not included on their books as either an operational lease or a finance lease. So in other words, it's a small lease. Like, I think if there's a lease agreement for like 2,000 cars, that's a huge financial expense. And so that lease has to be recorded as like mark-to-market accounting. There's accounting rules that apply
Yeah.
that it can be included in the books, but smaller, don't, that's probably the case. Yeah, it's,
Iya.
taking that example.
Ini ada yang nggak dituliskan nih di soalnya itu bahwa kayak B itu dia punya beberapa kendaraan disewakan tapi jumlahnya itu tidak memenuhi ini sih, tidak memenuhi apa yang disebut. Jadi misal perusahaan itu bilang kalau misalnya dia menyewakan kendaraan tapi jumlahnya itu tidak sampai 2.000 itu nggak akan dimasukkan ke emisi dia, jadi nggak akan masuk ke pembakaran langsung, masuk di skop 1 skop 2-nya, tapi ya nanti dimasukkan ke skop 3 karena kan istilahnya itu di luar dari ini, dia yang menetapkan batasan operasionalnya itu. Jadi kalau punya sewa di atas 2.000 kendaraan itu masuk tanggung jawab saya, tapi kalau enggak ya udah dianggap ke scope yang lainnya. Bisa jadi itu kesepakatan di ininya, di perusahaannya.
So an example would be, we had, over 200, offices that we leased at Train, for sales and service purposes. And I believe that showed up on our books as an operating lease, liabilities. And we chose the financial control approach. And therefore, we did not include those operating leases because we were using the financial control approach under our scope 1 and 2. Rather, we reported it in scope 3. And the reasoning, so we didn't do that without justification. The reasoning that we used is that we had no control over improvements to like energy efficiency and so forth. And in some cases, we didn't even have visibility to the electricity bill. So because we had little control over the ability to reduce emissions in those facilities, and we really couldn't show, so therefore we weren't able to demonstrate a year-over-year change. That justified our moving that to scope 3, right?
Jadi pada dasarnya perusahaan itu bisa memilih kalau misalnya memang dia itu kontrolnya terhadap aset tersebut yang dia miliki itu lemah, artinya seperti misalnya dia tidak bisa menjamin untuk misalnya penghematan energinya dari aset yang dia punya, itu bisa dialihkan dari skop 2 ke skop 3. Yang penting disampaikan gitu justifikasinya itu apa, untuk memindahkan ini. Jadi misalnya ini sama-sama list car fleet ya, kenapa yang di company A masuk di skop 1, kenapa yang di company B masuk di skop 3 gitu ya. Mungkin karena jumlahnya yang di skop B itu tidak terlalu banyak, kemudian juga mungkin kalau yang A itu disewakannya itu misal di Makassar ya, tapi kalau yang lain itu mungkin disewakannya mungkin jauh di Toraja, daerah wisata gitu ya. Dia tuh kayak ya nggak bisa ngontrol, makanya dimasukkan ke scope 3. Jadi bukti-bukti yang digunakan untuk mendokumentasikannya itu tidak akan sebanyak yang di scope 1 gitu. Dan dia juga kalau di Makassar kan bisa ya diatur. Ini udah ada BBM, udah ada yang biosolar yang B40 nih, udah ganti aja. Tapi yang di sana itu kayak ya tunggu dulu, nggak bisa kita main gitu. Kalau di pom bensinnya nggak ada, kita mau pakai apa gitu. Nah, mungkin alasannya seperti itu. Jadi istilahnya kayak memindahkan aset dari kriteria di skop 1 ke skop 3 itu yang penting ada justifikasinya, bisa dilakukan.
This is just an example from a sustainability report showing the use of the operational control approach. And they're giving their reasoning. So they're excluding facilities operated by a third party from their scope 1 and 2 reporting. And they're stating that they use the operational control approach. Okay, so we'll move on to calculations.
Yeah, we have like 30 minutes to go.
Yep.
Bagaimana Bapak dan Ibu, ada pertanyaan sebelum kita lanjut? Pak Mau? Anissa? Makin pusing? Makin pusing, apalagi nanti kalau ketemu kliennya yang beneran level. I know, like company things is complicated.
It's very complicated.
Yeah, they usually have more than one plan, set plans, and then when you have like some control this plan, do you have like a total financial control or operational control or Maybe it's related to the test report, right? So sometimes they hide that's kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. You're not getting the full picture.
Yes.
Yeah, and if they, it's difficult.
Yeah, we had,
We had 83, but I worked in tree with 83. And Johnson Controls, I think we had like 100 sold. And so for each of those plans, we need to make sure we had like everything, because they were putting on, small, expensive budget. It was, it was.
like here and also like, there's a different division, like marks for more and then marks for other.
How do they treat that's true.
Yeah, based on like the division or the product.
Right.
But they have the,
But slowly.
yeah, they have the dog food stuff, and I think the factory is in Java Island. Maybe not here, so if you have contract with this marks side, how will we set up the lead more?
Yeah.
Okay, kita lanjut, Bapak dan Ibu.
Okay. All right, so we'll move on to calculations. There are 3 methods of calculating emissions. So let me back up a minute. So you define your organizational boundary and you define your operational boundary. When you define your operational boundary, you're saying we have these activities and we're going to include them in either scope 1, 2, or 3. So as an organization, you've gone through that process to outline all of that. The next step is to collect the data that you need. So understanding what data is available will help you determine which calculation methodologies you like to use. And they go from, on this slide, they go from most accurate to least accurate. So I think what you're familiar with is direct monitoring, where you're actually measuring emissions.
But I don't think that I mean, direct monitoring, you get the CO2 concentration, but that's not the data you need for the GST inventory, is it?
Well, can you give me an example of direct, like
the direct measurement using like continuous emission monitoring system, like the SEMS.
For what kind of industry?
Maybe cement industry.
Okay.
So you basically measure the emissions from the point source. Yeah.
So in other words, when they're making clinker, it's actually emitting carbon dioxide, and you have you're actually measuring the amount of carbon dioxide that's emitted.
Well, yes.
Yep.
There's 2 methods, first using CHAMS, and then sometimes the industry compare with the direct reading using the gas analyzer.
Using the gas analyzer. Yeah. So that's not going to be everything, but yes, that would be a component. So what you'll find is that when you gather your activity data and determine which calculation methodologies you're going to use, you're most likely going to have a hybrid, right? You'll have some activity data that you'll use to estimate emissions. You'll have some direct emission monitoring data, and you might have to use a mass balance approach in some cases, or might be able to do that. So most companies will have a hybrid. Most industrial manufacturers use activity data solely. Most chemical companies can use stoichiometric for some of their, products, and then cement and other high emission high emitting industries can use direct measurement. We never used direct measurement at Train because it just didn't apply. We didn't have a process like that that actually directly emitted emissions. So we'll talk about each of these. I'll talk about the estimate method first. So this is the least accurate. You will, this is the way that you calculate greenhouse CO2 equivalent emissions in tons is you take your activity data, you multiply it by emission factor, you get your tons of emissions, and you multiply that by global warming potential to get your CO2 equivalent. So again, we're normalizing everything to CO2, which has a global warming potential of 1. And we'll look at this in detail. The stoichiometric method, you don't have to use activity data usually. Activity data is typically dollars spent, kilowatt hours of electricity consumed, therms of propane consumed, that sort of thing. With stoichiometric, the stoichiometric method, you simply take your emissions and multiply it by the global warming potential to get CO2 equivalent. So where do you get the tons of emissions? In the case of, this is sometimes referred to as a mass balance approach. So I think there's a number of ways to look at this, and you're the chemist, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But I'll tell you how we did it. So we used refrigerants. We charged air conditioning units before we shipped them with refrigerants. So we had a big tank with R410A, whatever, out back. And every month the supplier would come and make sure the tank was full. Every month we would ship a certain number of products that contained refrigerants. And at the end of the month, we said, okay, how much did the supplier sell us? How much did we sell to customers? And what's remaining? And the difference would be anything that has been vented to the atmosphere, emitted to the atmosphere. And we would take that difference and multiply it by the appropriate global warming potential to get our CO2 equivalent. But if you're a chemical company, you may, or you're a company that uses chemicals and processes chemicals, you may take, you can use the quantity of a particular chemical that you purchased and apply the actual chemical process equation to that, the chemical equation, to determine from, you make the assumption that the reaction is 100%. That's an assumption that you have to make. But you know the emissions that result from that chemical reaction based on the chemical process and the amount of the chemical that you purchase. So those are two ways to think about stoichiometric. Cement clinker is another case where you can also use stoichiometric because you know what that chemical reaction is.
Okay. So basically, this is just like maybe you react water with something, and then the result of the reaction is this, and then you do the stoichiometric calculation.
Yeah.
Like the chemistry.
Yeah.
Exam.
Yeah. I think, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that might apply to the fertilizer company.
Yeah, it would.
It's like they would. Yeah, it's heavy chemistry stuff,
Right.
with that. And then, so in addition to the stoichiometric calculation, do we also calculate the byproducts thing? and also the waste, like the reaction might not
Be 100%.
be 100%, of course.
You would have to know that, though. You'd have to have that information. Yes, then you would have to account for the byproducts, but it might be a footnote. It might be a separate comment. You may report that separately.
So, I just have one question. So if we measure the emission from the combustion process, and then we have the lab result, the company has the lab result, and then
Right.
the company gives to us the result. Should we like what should we do? I mean, we believe the measurement, or we do checking with the bill with their obviously purchasing bill.
You could check, you could verify that against the purchasing bill, yeah. It depends on what their information trail is, how well it's documented, right? So if you pull a data point and you say, how did you calculate that? Where did you get the activity data? Where did you get the emissions data?
Okay, but
What were your assumptions?
But remember, when they measure the CO2 emissions directly
Mhm.
from the chimney,
Yep.
but that's only like a measurement, one time measurement, while the data is the aggregated data of.
Oh, they're taking a point in time.
Yes, yes.
Measurement. So they would then, and they're applying that, they're making the assumption that that point in time represents.
I don't know, because to our knowledge, we always take the activity data. We use the
Yeah.
estimation method.
Right.
We never, kayak kita nggak pernah dikasih tahu ya kalau bisa pakai yang pengukuran itu, karena kita juga melakukan pengukuran. Takutnya kalau data itu yang dipakai kan menjebak diri sendiri namanya, ya kan? Karena jadinya seperti tidak ada independensinya gitu. Maksudnya itu kan kayak kita yang ukur, terus kita pakai data itu untuk menghitung emisi gas rumah kaca, itu nggak pernah. Makanya kita pakai data yang estimasi metodenya, ya kan? Yeah, we never use the direct measurement. I mean, the company, they do the direct measurement for the CO2, but that's for environmental report to the Ministry of Environment. Right. Yeah, but we never use the data they measure for our GHG inventory.
So I think you want to make sure that it's, to your point, I think you'd want to make sure that it is consistent, that it doesn't seem to be like an outlier. And so you would have to do that comparison. Because you want to be consistent with the environmental requirements, the environmental reporting. And sometimes, so the problem with activity data, the estimate method, this is the method that most companies use to calculate their emissions because it's the data that they have. This is the most common, but it's the least accurate. You can imagine a situation, it's the least accurate, especially when we're talking about scope 3. Because in some cases, activity data is dollars spent and doesn't actually accurately measure like therms of propane or something like that. So your assumption for what you're using for an emission factor could dramatically change the resulting number. So there's a lot of room for deviation, large deviations, I think. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
But I don't think there's okay. Well, if the power plant, they have like continuous monitoring emission,
They do.
of course they can get
they can get
the CO2 report
Right.
full time.
right. Yeah, that's different. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's in the concentration. The problem is it's in the concentration, and we need to convert from the concentration of CO2 into the ton scale,
Okay.
the mass scale, right?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, we can do that, like, maybe like multiply with the, again,
Molecule weight.
yeah, the molecular weight or something. We can find the calculation, but still, like, we never do that. I mean, you always use the activity, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I see.
I mean, yeah, using the density, because like you get concentration
Right.
and your milligram per volume of gas. So we need to make some calculation and adjustment to find the mass, the ton scale of the, or kilogram scale of the emissions, CO2 emissions.
So maybe when we're working on the worksheet, we can
Probably.
yeah, look at that more detail. Okay. So if we're looking at doing, using the estimate method, we have to collect activity data. I kind of show this. These are examples of the data that you might be able to get. So for instance, this is an electricity and gas bill combined from Canada. They're using, they give you kilowatts used and gigajoules of gas, kilowatts of electricity and gigajoules of gas. You might have a bill like this that you could refer to when to pull activity data from. You might have a company that has a fleet of trucks, may have what are called, we call them gas cards, but they might have some sort of corporate card that they use to purchase gas. So you could get that data from the provider, right? So you'd have the billing data, that would be activity data. Would tell you how much diesel or gas they used, how much it cost. If we're thinking about stoichiometric data, again, usually it's mass balance. Bills of lading or bills from the supplier would give you that, might give you that information. There's various places you can look for it. This is just one example of, the use of activity data, stoichiometric data, and how you would collect that data. So, oh, here, that's scary. The if you have energy bills like this, where they give you specific volumes of gas and amounts of electricity, this does tend to be fairly accurate because you can assume that 100% of the gas was combusted. Ideally you have generation data for the electricity. So even though it's an estimate method, because you're directly using what you're purchasing, it tends to be pretty accurate. And this would be reflected in scope 1 and 2, which typically are the most accurate. Okay, so now I would like to talk about sources of emission factors. So the IPCC, like as I said, sets the emission factors. There are lots of entities that consolidate those emission factors that make it easier for us to use. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol has published on their website the list of global warming potential values from AR6, the most, this is 100% AR5. They have AR6 up there. See, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm gonna do this. So many forms of things.
Ya, tadi stoichiometry itu berarti hanya salah satu perhitungan yang bisa dimasukkan ya?
Iya, kan kalau misalnya kayak perusahaan, bukan, yang ada stoichiometry itu biasanya ini, pupuk. Jadi kan pupuk itu kan bahan bakunya misalnya apa-apa, terus dia pupuknya jadi pupuk urea amonia gitu kan, itu hasil akhirnya urea amonia. Dengan ureanya berapa persen, amonia berapa persen, nah bahan bakunya itu apa? Nah itu biasanya itu yang bisa dihitung pakai stoichiometry. Atau misalnya perusahaan ini etanol. Tuh.
Jadi IB-nya itu berapa cm kan gitu?
Iya, kalau yang pupuk itu dia ini sih kayaknya hasil sampingnya itu yang amoninya terus dikonversi ke metana. Nah, metana dari metana baru ke CO2.
Iya,
Iya.
itu kan diri kan kadang-kadang kayak langsung dipakai itu nggak kata saya di apa namanya di regular.
Oh iya.
Jadi kan saya
Oke.
dia isi misalnya.
Nah itu masalahnya kasusnya di Indonesia tidak sama di dia. Jadi kalau kayak di yang perusahaan yang dulu itu kan waktu dikeluarkan ininya dari tangki besar itu diukur di perusahaannya. Jadi setiap produk yang keluar itu ada isiannya itu berapa volumenya. Nah harusnya Sharp atau apa yang pabrik AC itu kan begitu. Saya nggak pernah ke pabrik AC, mungkin Pak Jimail punya pengalaman di pabriknya Politron.
Ada data misalnya berapa berapa yang bocor kan kalau dari tabung besar kita kecil kan berpindah ketahuan nggak berapa yang ke atmosfer? Beda tempat aja.
Sampai yang ini ya, tapi kayaknya kan itu kan kalau yang tabung besar itu kan ada ininya, ada meterannya kan gitu loh. Begitu habis isi kan tinggal dilihat aja di meternya itu tinggal berapa.
Kalau masuk ke tabung itu kan nggak bocor cuma pindah tempat aja.
Iya.
Nggak dianggap ke atmosfer kan?
Kayaknya nanti ya, itu kalau nanti sudah menghitung yang ini kan belum masuk ke situ kan gitu. Dan masuk ke faktor emisi kan kayak leakage itu belum ini. Leakage-nya yang waktu di pengisian awal sama leakage-nya waktu pemakaian sampai waktu disposal kan.
Iya. Iya.
So what I've pulled up here is available on the greenhouse gas site, the greenhouse gas protocol site. And they have consolidated the data from the IPCC 6 assessment report. So this is the most recent. This was published in August of 2024. I believe that this is under the tools section of the greenhouse gas protocol. And what they've done is they've given us a nice, easily used form, all of the global warming potentials for different greenhouse gases. So in the quick fix example, for 100-year time horizon, which is the generally accepted time horizon to use.
A minor equity share.
The AR6, I think, only publishes 100-year time horizon.
Control over quick fix.
So they have the major greenhouse gases and then they have all of the different HFCs. Methane, after the fifth or after the fourth assessment report, has been separated into non-fossil and fossil. So methane from agricultural sources is different from fossil fuel methane. So pipeline emissions are different. Part of this was probably due to local regulations around minimizing methane leaks from natural gas pipelines. And you can see that it's,
apa istilahnya
it's
operasional dan
fairly
finansial gitu. Tapi ini off the
substantially
record
different,
ya.
I would say. It's
Yeah.
materially different. It's non-fossil fuel methane is 27, and fossil fuel methane is 29.8.
So
They
here
do
why the equity shares in
That's
company
AR6.
chemicals
Correct.
can
Mhm.
be the same as
The,
the financial control.
The N3 that you, so that would be a change, which I'm not familiar with, but I'm familiar with SF6, which is the sulfur hexafluoride. And I think both are used in the electronics industry, but I think both are regulated by some countries by the EU. So their use is being phased out.
Ya, jadi itu tergantung
But they
dengan
give you
pemilikan
the
ininya Pak,
global warming
aset yang
exemption for
entah itu
both.
mesin, entah itu
It's
bangunan
substantial.
gitu. Jadi
It's,
nah
they're
itu sudah awal.
huge,
Jadi bisa saja
huge
dia
sources
punya
of emissions. Powerful
memang punya
emitters.
saja 33% dan memang kepemilikan asetnya ya memang cuma segitu gitu. Beda dengan
They
kalau
have
misalnya kayak yang tadi saya bilang
HFOs,
ya,
which
ada
are
perusahaan nih,
blended
dia itu yang
next
dulu dia
generation
pendirinya,
refrigerants
otomatis
with
kan semua aset itu
low
punyanya,
GWPs,
tanahnya semua pasti atas nama
low
dia
global
kan
warming
gitu.
potentials.
Kemudian setelah dia melantai bursa dan si bapak ini karena udah tua dia nggak mau pegang saham banyak-banyak gitu, jadi dijual ke orang. Tapi tetap karena bangunan semua asetnya dia bisa
I mean,
punya
just, you know,
Do you have
kontrol
a
finansial
list
lebih besar,
of the
kontrol
foreign
operasional juga lebih
gas
besar.
that is
Tapi
using commercial
ya
like
kasusnya seperti
are
yang di
something
kalau yang di klien saya itu
Persentase juga berarti kalau financing.
bisa
equivalent. So in other words, HFC 23 is R
Kalau
23.
riset kan memang begitu persentase.
I don't,
ya.
but
Tapi
it's
equity dengan
I'll
financial
pull
itu
it up.
memang nggak ini kan karena kan namanya equity shares itu cuma bapak nih beli sahamnya PT Telkom karena bapak belinya dari sekarang sampai nanti umur
It's kind of,
tahun bapak
it's a
beli
little
terus
obvious, I
bapak
think,
jadi punya banyak
because,
share saham di PT Telkom tapi kan bapak nggak punya
We'll
power
see.
juga mau siapa juga
because
nggak
you
bisa.
have like HFC
Suara
134A,
ketika ini.
and that's gonna be
Iya,
R
salah
134A.
ya, I use the
Yep.
kayak sehari-hari bapak mau mencet satpam saya nggak suka nih tukang
Those
bapak
are not
nggak
included.
bisa.
They're not included in
Yeah,
here.
but I don't know the company.
Yeah.
The combination of the HCFCs.
Yeah, it's like you own the equity, big equity, but you may not involve in the financial thing. It's just because you just buy the
Okay.
private equity at the stock markets, and then yeah.
Before you go further,
Jadi Bapak dan Ibu mungkin kalau untuk yang sudah pernah ikut iklan itu sudah familiar ya dengan assessment report itu kan memang ada beberapa dan selalu diperbarui dan yang terakhir ini adalah assessment report AR6 ya. Ini ada di link yang sudah disampaikan dulu tapi nggak ada di presentasinya gitu. Nah cuman untuk yang terbaru itu ada metan fosil metan sama yang non fosil metana ya. Metana non fosil sama metana fosil itu juga sempat kemarin jadi perbaikan di perhitungan kita untuk yang inventory untuk supa gitu. Itu ada di ada yang berapa Pak?
Should I account for in my inventory using the equity share approach?
Okay. He asked when you use the AR4, 5th or 6th.
That number. Yeah. So, you should use the most recent assessment report data
we have
for your,
another example.
for your accounting.
The next slide.
There are some exceptions though. So, when we were reporting our emissions from refrigerants, we used AR4 because that was how we communicated with regulators, and I believe at the time the EPA required the use of AR4.
You don't need this is just example. We can
because
just
we had
if we have time, we can
to
discuss.
report all of our
If you think that
emissions from
refrigerants.
refrigerants. So I always counted on my policy, my regulatory people in the company to kind of tell me if I needed to stick to AR4 or I could use AR6.
Jadi sebenarnya tergantung pada regulasinya Pak Bang. Kalau nggak salah untuk di Indonesia, let's talk about Indonesia, the policy for the power plant, we still use the AR4. Kalau nggak salah ya AR4 ya, or 5, the fifth AR5.
The ownership
So,
and operatorship.
Untuk
Di Indonesia sendiri kemarin waktu kita melakukan inventory verifikasi inventory itu kan ada regulasinya dari Kementerian ESDM itu menggunakan yang AR5 ya kita pakai yang itu. Jadi tergantung, tapi kalau enggak, kalau misalnya secara general pakai yang terbaru. Kecuali memang ada persyaratan dari kementerian terkait.
They have guidance, there's no rule around this, but they
With
basically
respect
say
to
that
refrigerants,
because it's such a big category, how their emissions accounting and reporting, can best. The manufacturer has to publish, the global warming potential of the refrigerants, I believe. And so I think it's, the list is comprehensive, but
it represent the
manufacturers like Chemours, that are developing new refrigerants, they are producing blends.
standard
And
for the oil and
they
gas
may not be
industry.
included in the most recent database. So you have to go directly to the manufacturer to get the correct global warming potential.
They don't have the data.
Has additional guidance.
The manufacturer?
How to apply
The manufacturer should.
control approach.
No, they don't.
What's included in your inventory. As an oil and
Yeah.
gas.
Usually we can get the gas. It's the our big one.
But if they're so they're manufacturing, okay, so they're manufacturing the
Also
refrigerant.
on petroleum.
They're
hoping.
doing, did they develop the
If Asia,
refrigerant?
we have.
Or are they manufacturing, you have your own?
They
They purchased the. Yes, so they imported
But
from.
it's still like under
Chemours,
the.
something like that, right?
API.
Chemours, okay, would be the ones with, Chemours should be able to, if it's a refrigerant that's not listed,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Chemours would be, and Chemours developed it, they would be the ones to contact. Yeah, because so Fraser Train worked with Chemours to develop next generation refrigerant blends.
If we look on the right hand side.
And they wouldn't be listed on, a new refrigerant blend might not be listed.
Because of the
Iya.
complex.
Jadi untuk kayak terutama refrigerant itu kan banyak sekali sekarang riset-risetnya tuh yang blending seperti halnya dengan ini ya kasus biosolar itu biasanya kan kita nggak punya emisi emission faktor untuk biosolar yang terbaru karena nggak ada datanya itu kita harus minta ke manufacturernya cuman ya itu dia masalahnya sih.
Irrespective or regardless of their Chuckles Ventures equity.
I mean it's a state-owned company and sometimes
And they do
they're not
this
very
because they want to
Right,
ensure
yeah.
that their emissions reporting lines up with
But if
their
they
operational policy.
If somebody else developed it,
Environmental
then
state
R&D,
performance monitoring.
So in the GHG protocol also gives you a link to the emission factor database under the IPCC
contoh
site,
bagaimana pelaporan
and
emisi
search
di
using the
sektor
search
oil and gas.
tab. Should give you the exact same
Ya, itu
information
kalau yang
that they've
di
consolidated into a
petroleum, dia
nice neat
menggunakan
little PDF.
equity shares. Tapi kalau yang
But that's
Shell,
just
yang
for your
oil and gas itu,
information there.
ya ini yang pom bensin yang
Yeah, so it's two different examples of.
We
ya,
just
menggunakan
want
peralatan
to-
operasional.
It's new. I don't know.
Kayaknya mungkin kalau di Indonesia mungkin lebih banyak yang menggunakan pendekatan operasional juga
Keep
sih
going.
daripada kayak equity shares.
You'll be keep
I think it's also
Yes,
because of the consistency, like I don't know. Ini udah jam 12 kurang sedikit. Mau istirahat atau continue? Great, this is great. Turbulence.
Yes,
If
yes.
you have
Yes,
to
yes.
report something based on it.
So
every
this
week
week, something after.
It is not consistent.
Like it's
Yeah.
2 weeks before.
That's why, yeah.
And they do note that independent auditors have expressed the opinion that the recorded total has been found free of material misstatement. So, but your point is that if you're doing not every year, it's difficult because of the changes over time. Okay.
Mungkin kalau untuk friendly, pembangkit listrik, kemudian juga pengguran minyak, di mana kayak saham itu kan sangat fluktuatif ya. Jadi mungkin untuk laporan mungkin ya lebih baik dipilih yang karena biasanya walaupun berganti kepemilikan tapi pengoperasiannya operasionalnya tuh
It's like we're going to move on to operational boundaries.
Yeah.
And
But you know, it's not.
Brainstorm.
so this is where you determine, so you've defined your organizational boundary. The operational boundary is how you determine within that organizational boundary, what do you include, what is included in scope 1, what's included in scope 2, and what's included in scope 3. We will talk specifically about leased assets, like setting the operational boundary for leased assets. Ensure your control approach is aligned with the people's accounting. Look at how leases are recorded on the books. We'll talk about that more in a second. This is a nice diagram.
I think the
The application of both the organizational boundary and the operational boundary. So you see that we have a parent company that has determined that it has, let's say, full control, say full financial control over company A, company B, company C, company D. Within that corporate structure, they have several sources of emissions. They have a shipping, company A owns a shipping fleet. Company B has power generation and has buildings that it owns and controls. Company C owns a car fleet.
Bapak dan Ibu silakan selamat menikmati makan siangnya. Bisa kembali lagi ke ruangan ini jam 1 ya. Karena hari ini ada briefing. Jadi nanti kita cuma sampai jam 3.
So okay, so they're reporting using, let's say they're reporting using financial control approach.
Okay, that's
the shipping fleet owned by company A would be included in their direct emissions, their direct and indirect emissions. So in scope 1 and 2. Company B, the power generation unit, again, that would be included in scope 1 and 2. Their owned buildings, again, included in scope 1 and 2. So all of this that they own is included in scope 1 and 2. Now, when we're thinking about leased buildings, it's important to understand how the leases are consolidated in their financial statements. If a car fleet is leased, we go on. When we're thinking about lease